In creating my product, I had to be constantly aware of the effect it may have on the audience. For example, I had to look at different audience theories, as horror movies are known for having negative effects on a viewer. In looking at the film, I had to research into the mass audience as opposed to a niche audience, as that was who my film was targeted at. Looking at the effects model, I had to consider that my piece of work could have an influencing effect on the passive audience who are powerless against naturally in seeing the violent images typically seen in a horror film and trailer. Though, in creating a horror trailer, through audience research it was made clear that what attracted an audience were these violent images. The fear in creating a horror film is the risk of the Bobo doll experiment being applied to violence seen in real life. The experiment by Bandura showed a group of children who watched a video where a doll was being violently attacked, which led them to react in the same way, copying the violence they had seen. This can be applied to cinema, and particularly horror films, as there are accounts where violence in cinema is copied as shown in the Jane Bulger case. Though, this is more common in a younger viewer, so to avoid such effects, I have restricted my film to an 18 minimum. Obviously, this doesn't account for when the film is sold and may be shown to people under the restriction. However, it does mean that the film is clearly certified to prevent that from happening. Similarly, if my film is leaked on the internet, it may be available for a younger audience. I can hope to avoid this by releasing the film as soon as possible after it has been shown in the cinema. In terms of adult viewing, possibly being influenced by the violence in my film, in order to attract the audience, there must be violent images, as shown by my survey. It is what attracts a viewer. In my audience response, there was no clear indication that the audience may be influenced by the trailer or violent images. This draws on the idea that the audience may be attracted to the film for catharsis. This can be developed in looking at users and gratifications theory. This essentially leaves the power of the product with the audience. In this instance, my audience research proves that an audience is drawn to the product for both diversion and escapism. A horror film can be cathartic in being able to escape from reality and feel suspense, fear, anger, almost overwhelming emotions to leave the cinema feeling calm, almost unloading all these emotions, being in control of their consumption, helping them with shaping their personal identity. It can also aid in a social identity for the young adult target audience, as they may go with friends as a social event. When asked if they would watch the film, the audience predominantly said yes, as it looked good. Though one member of the audience said that they would be too scared, so they probably wouldn't go unless it was with friends, proving that this theory applies. One piece of audience feedback that particularly interested me, however, was the idea that due to the style of filming and the fact that the characters are trapped within a confined space, there will be a slight Big Brother feel. In some ways, this reinforces the theory by Steve Hall that the active audience will read a message within the text. This taught me there are many complex levels to the film. The mise-en-scène, specifically setting of the underground banquet type room in darkness, would make the audience feel enclosed themselves in the dark cinema. This increases fear, increasing the effects previously said. This removes responsibility from the director, ignoring the initial intention or meaning and allowing the active audience to create their own interpretation. Overall, my audience research taught me about the mass audience and the mainstream fans of horror. This brought me to focus on how my film could target and appeal to these audiences. In researching the audience, I learned how the conventions of not only horror but also narrative can be adapted to make the film more appealing. In filming, I learned what shot types appeal to the audience and what elements can draw an audience to a film. Similarly, creating the ancillary tasks, I learned about conventions and how the typical features of a film and poster can be adapted to create a new and exciting product that can appeal to a wider audience. Specifically, though, in creating the horror film, my audience research has taught me a lot about applying theory of audience to my audience response, and measuring the effects of my trailer and film. In doing so, I have most interestingly learned that film can be open to interpretation. The effect of a film, or specifically a horror film, can have an audience is dependent on the person.